And we put him on this committee because this was his bill that he had introduced. So welcome back to Commerce Committee, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so we're here today for a hearing on HB 2293, and we'll start with a brief introduction of what the bill does from Reviser Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2293 prohibits certain state agencies, actually all state agencies, from purchasing drones or related services if critical components were produced in certain specified countries of concern or were produced or owned by a foreign principal as defined in the bill. The bill also prohibits the purchase by state agencies from procuring final or finished goods or services from a foreign principal. The bill provides for certain exceptions and is effective for contracts or agreements entered into on or after July 1, 2025. So I'll quickly go through the sections of the bill because just as an outline. So Section 1 is a section that prohibits a governmental agency from purchasing or acquiring any drone or any related service, maintenance agreements, or equipment if the critical components were produced in a country of concern or produced or owned by a foreign principal. And we'll discuss the definitions for critical component, foreign principal, country of concern in just a bit. The timing of this prohibition is that it applies to contracts entered into on or after July 1st, 2025. So with respect to replacement parts, which the committee may recall was an issue for this bill last year, critical components, replacement parts that were acquired prior to July 1, 2025 that would otherwise violate the prohibition may continue to be used by a governmental agency that acquired the critical components. There's no specific cutoff for that use. But no new replacement components may be acquired from a foreign principal after July 1, 2025. There's an exception that's set out in the bill if the agency has no other reasonable means to acquire the critical component or addressing the agency's needs. The agreement is approved by the Secretary of Administration after consultation with the Adjutant General, and failure to acquire the critical components would pose a greater threat to state security than acquiring the critical components. Section 2 prohibits any state agency from contracting with a foreign principal to procure final or finished goods or services. This prohibition also only applies to contracts entered into on July 1st, 2025 or thereafter. And there is an exception that's laid out in the bill if the foreign principal, an agency may procure from a foreign principal if the foreign principal previously received a determination from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States that there are no unresolved national security concerns with respect to a covered transaction, and that's defined in that federal statute that's referenced there, 50 U.S.C. Section 4565. If no change in control of the foreign principal has occurred since the determination that would constitute a covered transaction, and the foreign principal has a national security agreement in effect on July 1st, 2025 with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States or the United States Department of Defense and maintains that agreement. Section 3 is a definition section. Definitions of particular note would include country of concern, critical component, drone, and foreign principal. So country of concern includes China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. Critical component means a distinct and serviceable article or articles that are the primary component or subcomponent of a process or subprocess necessary for recording, storing, or transmitting of data, and includes any software. Foreign principal, that's an important definition, means a government or any government official of a country of concern, any political party or member of a political party of a country of concern, any business entity or combination of persons, including any subsidiary owned or wholly controlled by any such entity, organized under the laws of or having its principal place of business in a country of concern, any agent or other entity under the control of a country of concern. Foreign principal also includes individuals whose residence is a country of concern and who are not citizens or permanent residents of the United States. Finally, the term includes any individual entity or combination of individual entities, as previously described, that has a controlling interest in any company formed for the purpose of manufacturing, distributing, transporting, or selling critical components for drones and related services and equipment. If enacted, this bill would become effective July 1st, 2025. Stand for questions.
All right, committee, any questions on what the bill does? Seeing none, I had one. This only applies to state agencies, or does it apply to local authorities as well?
This applies to state agencies. The definition of state agency is in Section 3. Means any department, authority, bureau, division, office, or other governmental agency of this state. And governmental agency is defined as a state or any political or taxing subdivision of the state or any office, agency, or instrumentality thereof. So it refers to a political or taxing subdivision of the state.
All right, so that would that be local authorities too? Okay.
Counties. Yeah.
All right, any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. All right, first up we have Mike Ditch from KLRDs with some information to go through.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. Mike Ditch with Legislative Research. In the interim, we provided a memo related to state-level regulation of economic transactions with foreign adversaries. I'll review just a few of the highlights from that particular memo, focused on 4 areas. Countries of concern, what they are, how we got to that label, federalism and federal action, relevant enacted state statutes, and relevant court decisions. So to start looking at foreign adversaries or countries of concern and where that label came from, if you start at the bottom of page 1, carrying over to page 2 on that particular memo, you'll see label of countries of concerns was typically used by states in their legislation, typically refers to 15 CFR 7.4's determination of foreign adversary. 7.4 is in reference to the Code of Federal Regulations and involves commerce and foreign trade regulations. 7.4 states the U.S. Commerce Secretary determined that the following governments or foreign non-government persons have engaged in a long-term pattern or serious instances of conduct significantly adverse to national security of the United States or security and safety of U.S. persons and therefore constitute foreign adversaries. And those countries include the People's Republic of China, including the Hong Kong and Macau Special Administrative Region, Republic of Cuba, Islamic Republic of Iran, Democratic People's Republic of Korea or North Korea, Russian Federation, and the Venezuelan politician Nicolas Maduro or the Maduro regime. You'll notice that in HB 2290 that will be heard next week, the country of concern definition relies on the CFR reference. Today's Bill 2293 specifically lists the countries and is substantially similar to the CFR 7.4. Briefly looking at federal action in this area, at the bottom of page 3 and top of page 4, you'll see proposed federal legislation, but currently no law comprehensively regulates such transactions. Presidents historically taken action through executive orders, such as establishing an interagency committee, and for those of you in House Commerce last year might remember CFIUS. It's the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, was established in 1975 under an executive order, given statutory authority from the Defense Production Act. The committee is chaired by the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury and consists of 11 regular members. This interagency committee serves the president by reviewing foreign investments in the United States that may pose national security risks. When CFIUS determines a transaction poses such risk, it can impose mitigation measures or make recommendations to the president on whether to prohibit or suspend a covered transaction. Ultimately, the president has authority on what action to take and has prohibited 7 transactions, with the latest 2 being in 2020. In HB 2290, the bill references transactions not reviewed by CFIUS. These are called non-notified transactions. In today's bill, the bill references state agencies entering into a contract or agreement with foreign principals already reviewed by CFIUS with no unresolved national security concern or entered into a national security agreement with CFIUS. Moving on to an enacted state legislation during the 2024 session, you can flip to page 6 of the memo if you would like to see that. Kansas enacted HB 2711 last year, which required state-managed funds divestment from investments with countries of concern and prohibited investments and deposits with a bank or company domiciled in a country of concern. During the interim, KPERS reported to an interim committee that KPERS was in compliance with this act. Taking a look at other states on page 6, there's a table that shows all enacted 2024 legislation by state and the type of data or property affected by that legislation. For today's discussion, we'll focus on real property since HB 2290 involves real property. Georgia passed a law preventing any non-resident alien from acquiring any possessory interest in ag land or land within a 10-mile radius of any military base, installation, or airport, military installation or military airport. The law did not apply to residential property. To define foreign government, they relied on the list provided in that CFR 7.4. Indiana's law prevents a prohibited person from acquiring real property within a 10-mile radius of a military installation. The restriction is not retroactive, not applicable to residential property, dual citizens, or any lawful permanent resident of the United States, and that law defined a foreign adversary as defined by 15 CFR 7.4. Louisiana prohibited foreign adversaries from acquiring any interest in agricultural land. Foreign adversary was defined by 15 CFR 7.4, and their law does not apply in certain situations, including for legal permanent residents with a lawful presence in the U.S., or a foreign business entity that is a religious, educational, charitable, or scientific corporation. Violation of their law requires divestiture within 1 year, and if no divestment occurs, the entity is subject to a civil penalty of $50,000. Mississippi placed certain restrictions on certain types of land purchases, including forestry, agricultural, industrial, and residential purposes. They defined a foreign adversary as a foreign adversary designated by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, which I believe is in reference to 15 CFR 7.4. Wyoming requires the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security to investigate any conveyances, leases, and leasehold interests within or near critical infrastructure, and whether the interest holder is determined to be a foreign adversary by 15 CFR 7.4. So even though several bills were enacted in 2024, these and prior laws are being challenged in federal court. At least one bill is the subject of a case that is pending a decision by District Court of Appeals. That case is Shen v. Simpson. It involves two Chinese nationals challenging a Florida law that generally prohibits non-citizens domiciled in China or other countries of concern from acquiring any interest in real property in the state. The plaintiff sought relief on the basis of the Equal Protection and Due Process Clauses, the Fair Housing Act, and the Supremacy Clause. The district judge denied their relief, and the plaintiffs appealed. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals granted in part injunctive relief. The court determined the appellants were likely to succeed on their claim that the Florida law is preempted by federal law, specifically 50 U.S.C. 4565, known as the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act of 2018. One appeals judge issued a concurring opinion stating the appellant should have also had the relief granted because the Florida law violates the Equal Protection Clause. The appellate court heard oral arguments in April 2024, and they are still expecting to issue an opinion on the merits of the case at a later date. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
All right, committee, so obviously a lot of information there, and this has to do with the bill in front of us and the bill that we're going to hear next week, I believe on Monday. So are there any questions for research? Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for compiling this. Do you know, have any other states enacted legislation regarding rentals or leases? We can talk about it Monday as well when we have the hearing on the bill.
From what I've seen so far, I haven't seen anything that specifically called that out. But again, without looking at the definition of property interest, I don't know if that wrapped into rental or any type of agreement.
All right, any further questions? Thank you, and thank you for compiling that information in short notice. All right, we're going to open the proponent testimony, and we're going to start with our online person, Jacqueline Deal.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Majority Leader, and members. My name is Jackie Deal. I'm in Washington, D.C. I've spent the better part of over 2 decades researching the Chinese military, and I guess that's why I'm appearing today in support of this bill. I'm also on the advisory board of a nonprofit called State Armor, which is trying to help states protect themselves from global threats. Unfortunately, I think we are closer today to war with the People's Republic of China than we've ever been in my lifetime. And this is based on Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, his statements and his actions, including exercises of the People's Liberation Army, the party's military, in proximity to Taiwan, in parts of the Pacific, in the South China Sea. And this is particularly alarming in light of the fact that we rely on, in large measure, on one Chinese company for our drones that are used by hobbyists and police forces across the country, including in Kansas. One company called DJI has roughly 90 to 95% market share. In some of the states where we've done investigations, it has up to 95% of the government business. And relying on a drone platform and software from a hostile foreign adversary country is both dangerous and what Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party wanted to have happen. So let me explain why it's dangerous, and then let me explain why it's consistent with the Chinese Communist Party's strategy and what Kansas can do to counter that. Briefly, it's dangerous because in January of 2024, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the federal CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, put out a warning saying relying on foreign drones is dangerous both because of the possibility of data theft, or the footage, the feeds from the drones going to an adversary country and being used for espionage or intelligence collection and preparation for targeting in a war, say. It's also dangerous, they said, because of network compromises, because these drones come with software packages. So that means your computers are exposed to the software from the foreign adversary country. And the warning from the government went on to explain and cite that in 2017, under Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party put out a national intelligence law that says that even private or nominally commercial private companies have to work with the Chinese intelligence agencies and provide data upon request. And they have to lie about it or deny that they did so. They have to secretly provide their data to the Chinese government, meaning it's available to the Chinese military and intelligence services. It's also dangerous for police to rely on these drones. I understand that they're appealing insofar as they're cheap and they appear to work very well. But we saw on the battlefield in Ukraine a few years ago, the Ukrainians noticed that there were certain features that seemed to be turned on for the Russian side that helped them target Ukrainian forces, and the reverse was not true. So there are features on this drone and software packages for tracking the drones that were being manipulated in ways that made it easier for the Russians to find Ukrainian civilians or other targets, and were not enabled for the Ukrainians. So that this means that the drones that our police forces are using could have an external hostile party toggle their features and enable them or disable them. You could even imagine turning the drones into kind of kamikaze platforms, flying them into things. They are susceptible to remote control. They have backdoors, and they come with software that poses a cybersecurity threat. So what seems safe or useful for security has these risks associated with them. And then finally, this is consistent with Xi Jinping's strategy. When he came into power in 2012, he said, I'm going to usher in the Chinese dream, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which seems to be at the expense of the American dream or the so-called rules-based order. He has a policy called military civil fusion, which says that Chinese scientists and business people should go out and get the best technologies commercially available or in the civilian sphere, use them for the Chinese military, figure out how to apply them for the Chinese military, and also commercially dominate the space. So the Chinese government will help Chinese companies like DJI, subsidize them, potentially provide them with technology that has been gained through espionage overseas, make these companies into national champions. Because of their subsidies, they can charge less than foreign competitors. Then the foreign competitors don't have offerings of their own. So they become dependent, as we appear to have become dependent on DJI drones. And that gives the Chinese Communist Party leverage over us. It means that if we want them in a war, they might be able to turn off the supply. It means that we have to worry about the back doors or the susceptibility of these platforms to manipulation. And this is again, consistent with military civil fusion and Xi Jinping's win the future strategy. So I think Kansas has an opportunity here. It's not the only state that's considering this legislation or making moves. As the research representatives said, there's an opportunity here to kind of address this vulnerability that's opened up. At the federal level, Congress and the NDAA gave the new administration 1 year to evaluate this threat and respond. So it's possible that this year the Trump administration will also ban the DJI drones. In fact, it's probably likely given the security risks that the FBI and CISA have already outlined. Also, the company is already on the Defense Department's 1260H list of companies working with the Chinese military that the Defense Department is not allowed to work with. So there are a lot of signs that Kansas could get ahead of this by following the guidance from the federal level and adopting this bill and creating a market for American companies to enter the business of drones for hobbies or for police. And there, I think there's some grounds for hope because of the movement at the federal level and some of the steps that other states are taking. You now see companies like Brink, Flock, Skydio, and Anduril making drones here in the United States. So with that, I'll thank you again and take any questions.
All right, thank you for the presentation. And committee, are there any questions? Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the potential hidden components in some of these drones that we should be weary about, some things that we should look about? I ask because I've heard about double chipping is something that's been recently brought to the forefront of conversations, and I kind of like to learn a little bit more about that.
To be honest, I am not specifically a drone expert, so I don't know that I know all of the risks, but I would, I guess, commend to you that CISA FBI warning that talked about the threats to your data if you use these drones because of the 2017 law that says any data collected through the platform that goes back to DJI then goes to the Chinese Communist Party. So these drones are flying over sensitive infrastructure and providing kind of ground level or just above ground level mapping data that's kind of invaluable or could be invaluable from a targeting perspective for military purposes or sabotage purposes. And then they also kind of pointed out the risk of network compromises because there's associated software. And just last week, I was testifying about this in Nebraska, and someone came up to me after the hearing and said, I had to use DJI drones in my job. And the way it works is if you don't use them for even as little time as a week, the company makes it so that you have to plug them in and get a firmware update, which means that you're exposing yourself in a software sense or in a cyber sense to whatever else, DJI or the Chinese intelligence services might want to send in. So just the way when, we talk about TikTok and we're worried about data keystrokes being logged or passwords being taken or data from your other use of the phone being exfiltrated because you've downloaded that app, there's a similar problem with DJI drones and the accompanying software, which you have to use. And then again, from the battlefield in Ukraine, we learned that the company can use its software access to selectively enable or disable certain features.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a CCP specific question for you.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned that the CCP has control and oversight of these folks that are making these drones. Can you go into a little bit more detail about how these company CEOs are rolled into the CCP, what kind of influence they have over the CCP, and maybe, if you could you go into a little bit about a little bit more how the CCP has cornered the drone market?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. The research that went into the designation that put DJI on the federal Defense Department's 1260H list suggested that we had evidence that DJI was working with the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army. There's also a commerce designation that sanctioned DJI because of its complicity in the genocide in Western China, where China's internal domestic security forces have been detaining and imprisoning people of the Uyghur background. So we know that DJI works closely with China's national security authorities, and the response of, so there are 7 people who are the most powerful men in China. I say men because they're all men, so I don't need to say men and women or people. There are 7 men on the Politburo Standing Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And when the Defense Department put DJI on the 1260H list, one of the 7 was sent to DJI's headquarters, and he apparently delivered the message. It was relayed that he said, "We will give you no limits support." So our response to your being put on this no-go list for defense, for the US Defense Department and its contractors, is you will receive no limits support. We stand behind you. You are a national champion company. And again, the previous research had shown that it had benefited from subsidies and technology procured from overseas. There was a time when American companies were at the cutting edge of drones, and we lost that in part, I think, because we succumbed to this military civil fusion strategy where through commercial access and academic access, Chinese talent program or other kinds of agents associated with the Chinese Communist Party got access to the technology, and then it went back to this company. This company was supported to become dominant in the market. And then we turned around and, we don't have as many alternatives as we would like. So this is why it's really important to take the steps that you're considering to create a market so that US companies can be confident that if they step up and make drones here or in allied countries, they'll be able to compete with DJI.
Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll try to make my question make sense, but you actually testified and gave examples of companies in the United States that currently manufacture drones, correct?
Yes, I tried to name a few that I know of.
Okay, and so my question really is around the National Defense Authorization Act that will prohibit drones to be, purchased, the DJI drones. We understand all of that, and this is circling around that topic. But my question is, so these companies that are manufacturing, won't they have difficulty being able to be approved for FCC certifications without some type of new certification process that just pretty much looks at or guarantees that none of their component parts are from the companies of concern? So I guess I'm circling back to, we can have them manufacture in the United States, but without some type of certification process, how do we know that some of the chips or component parts or the transmitters or are safe and to be used? So that's question number 1. And then number 2, would you anticipate that the Department of Commerce would initiate some type of purple pathway that would create required certifications so that when they are manufactured, they are submitting to all of the safeguards to prevent any component parts from countries of concern?
Thank you very much for the question. It's an excellent question because as I'm sure you know, Mr. Chair and Madam Representative, there was a case recently where Skydio, which is one of the US drone companies that actually has been supporting troops in Ukraine, was sanctioned by China on the grounds that the Chinese Communist Party had evidence that Skydio drones were being used by Taiwan. So as a kind of response to perhaps the US government's putting DJI on the 1260H list, the Chinese said, we're going to put Skydio on our no-go list, and we're going to stop shipping batteries to Skydio. So it turned out that the American company, through a Japanese contractor, which it was relying on for batteries, was exposed to China because it turned out that the Japanese supplier of batteries had a factory in China. And so when the Chinese sanctioned Skydio, the batteries for Skydio drones stopped being shipped. So there really is, a great need for attention to detail and integrity in the supply chain and components. I believe that the federal government's way of handling this is to make defense providers certify that they are not using problematic components. And if they are caught, then they have to pay huge penalties and they lose their contracts. I imagine something similar could be done or will be done, perhaps in the process of being done, with regard to a commerce certification or a pathway there that will assure people that drones that are in our airspace are compliant with the pending or maybe forthcoming federal regulations. I imagine that's how it will go. But I don't know for sure because I think this is something that's kind of happening as we speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just that follow-up question is, and I appreciate that perspective because yes, the Department of Defense does require manufacturers to adhere to their strict policies for component parts. But if we start needing to develop more and more drones and replace the existing DJI drones that are throughout our, let's say, our police and safety departments in Kansas and the United States, or commercial drones, then your thinking is that the National Institute of Standards and Technology or some like agency is going to have to require some type of certification process like the DoD requires for the manufacturers to ensure that we do have compliant manufacturing, because currently there are no requirements for commercial. Is that correct?
I'm actually not positive on the requirements for commercial. I know in the vertical takeoff and lift, like eVTOL space with kind of air taxis, it's up to the FAA to regulate those because they're in our airspace. I don't know what the state of play. I apologize. I can get back to you. I can take this as a question for homework and respond with whether right now drones that are used by hobbyists or members of the public or police forces have to be certified. If they don't, then perhaps that will be required, or perhaps the onus will be on the people importing DJI drones not to continue to do so or not to sell them, and there will be liability attached to selling them. And the companies that are presenting themselves as alternatives and not composed of hostile foreign adversary parts will similarly be liable. So I'm not sure what the path will be, but I can take that back and get back to you, and I apologize.
Well, I would definitely appreciate that. And I was actually mostly focusing on commercial drones or drones that are used from our public safety departments. So those are kind of where I'm looking at, because I think anything that we would ban would be from that perspective, at least those public perspectives, rather than just a hobbyist or someone of that nature. Thank you.
Committee, any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much for your time today, and it looks like we got you out of here just in the nick of time for your next meeting, so.
Thanks very much.
We appreciate it. All right, next up, we have Majority Leader Chris Croft. Make sure you turn that microphone on, sir.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? There we go. Getting a little bit of schooling up here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Those of you in the crowd are looking at his best side.
Well, here we go.
Go ahead, sir.
Those that know this, he usually gives me about a 2-minute time block, so I've tried to prepare for that eventuality. One of the things you heard when she was talking kind of struck me was if you watch the movie I, Robot, the robots, the drones, they're helpful until they're not. And Representative, as you talked about the certification program, that you would ask me that question as well. We did send that up to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and just waiting for an answer back. So hopefully either one of us will get that answer in time. Last year, you guys know we carried this bill. We went through this process, and there were some concerns. We did a lot. We tried to do so much with the bill. This time, it does not do that. This time, it's very kind of straightforward in where we're going, and try to take all the concerns we had or that were voiced and seeing how we put all this back together and go through that process. So that's what you have in front of you. You've heard a lot about DJI. And look, here's the thing. Whatever you think about the company itself, but they have 70% of the market. When you look at a national security issue, it's the ability to bring all this data together. So any one small piece goes, well, I'm just a small piece. But you're part of a small piece of a bigger mosaic. And that's then where we have a problem when it comes to national security. And that's where we find ourselves at today. So I would just tell you that's part of it. You also heard some other things about how they're able to control. We've seen that, especially in some of the briefings we've received, and hopefully you'll receive some of those things. But last year, there was also a concern about the limited manufacturing capability within the United States, and whether they'd be able to keep up with what others have been able to provide. Searching this morning, there are 74 U.S. manufacturers now. So just in the year that we've been going through this, or 2 years now, that's how much it's grown from 1 to 2. We heard from 1 last year, and now we have 74 that are out there that are trying to grow, and we're also trying to bring several of them here to Kansas as well. We have a great environment for that. So I just put that out there. There's a lot of things happening because we're having this conversation. One of the things to do, and I was going through some notes and a couple of executive orders and things. And by the way, this is something that's been going through multiple administrations, not just this one. It was in the last one, the one before that, and the one before that. They've been talking about these things. So one of the quotes in here is, investment at all costs is not always in the national interest. Certain foreign adversaries, including the PCR, systematically facilitate investment in the United States to obtain cutting-edge technology, to gain intellectual property, and leverage in strategic industries. That's what they do. You know, the economic security, that's one of the elements of national security, of the national power economy, is definitely a national security issue. Foreign adversaries are targeting the crown jewels of United States technology, the food supplies, the farmland, the minerals, the natural resources, ports, shipping terminals, all in an effort to develop and modernize its military. So we're funding their development of their military, their intelligence, and other security apparatus, which is of significant interest to us. And again, I'm not trying to read the testimony, so I picked out some things that are not in the testimony specifically, so that's completely different. But we were talking about things that have happened. In May 2018, citing cybersecurity concerns, the DoD suspended all procurement of commercial off-the-shelf drones. That was in 2018. In fiscal year 2020, the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, codified into law a provision banning the purchase and use of drones and components manufactured in countries known to be of national security threats. They did again in 2023 prohibit DoD and its contractors from using those same type of drones or purchasing. In May of 2019, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, so CISA, issued an alert to industry highlighting that cybersecurity concerns of these drones. The Department of Interior did the same. In that same year, so did the Department of Commerce. So this is not just the DoD, this is all across government. We're seeing this. We're talking about, this is 2019, 6 years ago. This is not today, not yesterday, but 6 years ago. CISA in 2019 issued an alert to the U.S. government and regulatory agencies that they should prohibit any new procurement in those kind of drone technologies and urge all regulated critical infrastructure owners and operators to immediately remove such technology from their fleets. That was 2019. That's 6 years ago. And we're going to have people say, oh, well, we can't do it. We hadn't been thinking about it. Well, we've had time. This year, Senator Mark Warren, Democrat, Virginia, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican, Tennessee, and a bipartisan group of their colleagues urged state and local and tribal and territorial governments to implement a comprehensive approach to enable the elimination of all drones manufactured by companies with ties to the Chinese Communist Party from critical infrastructure and public safety inventories and supply chains. That's what we're doing. We're doing exactly what they have asked us to do at this level. They're taking care of some things at the national level. This is a one-team effort that we have to get after, and that's what this bill's about. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions or comments? Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Sorry to put you on the spot, but excuse me, you'd probably be the best person to answer this particular question. So I want to refer you to page 2, section 2 of the bill. It says, no state agency shall enter into a contract or agreement to procure final or finished goods or services from a foreign principal. That does not mention drones in it. So my interpretation of it is that all final and finished goods are part of it. Was that the intention of the bill?
I'm sorry, we were scrambling to get a copy of the bill in front of the conferee.
Just tell me what page again.
Page 2, lines 1 through 3. It does not mention drones in relation to final and finished goods or services.
And that's exactly what we had last year, is it not? Revisor.
Revisor Reimer. Sorry, we took your bill away from you. Well,
That's why I thought you were coming up.
I'm just concerned that as it is worded in its entirely new section,
Yeah.
that refers to any finished good at all.
Yeah, fair enough. And if, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Revisor
Mr. Chair.
Reimer.
So I believe that this language was in SB 271 that was passed by the legislature last year, but if the committee gives me just a moment, I'll check and make sure.
Alternatively, would you be amenable to some sort of an amendment that includes the word drone in this section 2A and 2 and part 2?
Let's get an answer to what it does before we speculate.
Absolutely.
The language is exactly the same that was in SB 271 for that provision.
So in last, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Majority Leader Croft.
Thank you, sir. And so last year, that was part of the conversation, was it not, Mr. Advisor?
I wasn't really involved in that whole process, but it was in the bill, so obviously it would have been.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would not be terribly opposed to it. It depends upon what the language would say in the process. But, you know, that's the intent of the bill, is about the contracting with the drones.
Thank you very much. I just want the language to match the intent of the bill. Thank you.
So we'll look further into that before next week. Representative Chrissy Williams. All right, Majority Leader, you mentioned, I have about 17 questions. You mentioned briefings in your testimony and the possibility thereof. And can you tell us, are we going to be able to have some sort of a security briefing before we work this bill and then the one from next week, and how that might work?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, that's what we're working on right now. We wanted to get that to you. Obviously, it would have to be in a closed session, so you could get more of the detailed information that you might need for being able to truly understand the full threat. And although I've had a TS-SCI clearance, I don't have that anymore, and I don't have a need to know on all this stuff. But you can clearly see through all the process and all the discussions, you can start to put it all together where these things are going. But to answer your question, that is what we're working on, so you would have that presentation.
All right, so one of the issues we had last year was we had several people that are in the services in this body that understood what the true risk was and what the true threat was, but they really couldn't talk about it because it was classified. And so it was a little bit difficult to get to the urgent need of why we had to do the bills last year so quickly. And I think that would be helpful in order for us to have some sort of a security briefing, even if they can't tell us everything. They can tell us enough to create the need.
Yes, sir.
So-
Agreed. And we'll try to get that.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of time, he asked the question that I was going to ask. Mr. Majority Leader, did you receive any information from counterparts in D.C. dealing with CFIUS, all of those that are with that, for lack of a better term, fusion cell, if you will, concerning security clearances for us to be able to receive that? Because we did have a joint interim committee, and that was one of the recommendations from the committee, to have a do-out whereby you either received a classified brief with those members that have been screened and cleared, or a sanitized version for the body at large in a closed setting. Can you elucidate on that? Did we receive word back on that?
Majority Leader Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have had a lot of conversations. In fact, made several trips up to DC to try to get members of certain committees on both parties to be able to have a clearance or at least be authorized to receive presentations of a higher level of security. That unfortunately has not been given to us at this date. There's only about 4 or 5 states that do have it, but nobody has the capability that Kansas has with its fusion center. This fusion center we have here is pretty special, so we are really working hard to get there. As it relates to this, so they won't be able to give us, or the committee, a secret briefing. They can go as close as they can. They will walk that line, come up and talk to you as far as they can, but there is obviously a line they can't cross. I would just say that everybody, as they've gone through this thing, have been trying to give us as much information and have been very clear about the threat that we face out there today.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the follow-on. Very quickly, the concept of countries of concern, Mr. Leader, are those the same? Is that the same language that you see in other legislation? Does it pertain to the same countries? Can you comment on that, please?
Majority Leader Croft.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So it is the same, save one. What we've seen at the national level, it says the government of, specific government of Venezuela, and ours just said Venezuela. And the reason we did that is because you look on the ground and you go, how do you decide, right? And you're trying to make them decide, and rather than do that, you just made it tied to Venezuela, because right now that is the government then. And so that's the only difference we have. And as we went through today, even again, looking at the latest executive order, they use the exact same language. So that was tied from the previous administration on language over to this right now.
Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Majority Leader, just to be clear, in the language of this bill, the beginning of this, it says any critical components for drones or any related services or equipment that were acquired prior to July 1, 2025. July 1, 2025 seems to be the beginning of all the movement in this bill. And they also goes on to say that they can, anybody who possesses a DJI drone or any kind of foreign adversary drone, they can use whatever inventory of replacement components they have, but they just can't purchase anything additional. And that goes on throughout the whole bill, correct? That seems to be the beginning of all transition. That's the hill.
Majority Leader Croft.
Mr. Chair, that's accurate about the way I understand it. Going through that process, yes.
And so if an agency had invested in these components, they can use all these up, and then you go to the end of their service agreement, and that should give them enough time to create a plan to advance their drone fleet or their drone tools, correct?
Majority Leader Croft.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And that's what I want to be clear on is last year what we were doing was we were saying, no, you have to be done with it by 5 years. This year we don't say that. You use it till its service life is out. And I think that's probably what you're going to hear later on too is, I suspect is, well, what happens if it's a smaller component of the thing and it makes it non-operational? At what point do they have to replace it? That's the discussion that I'm sure you'll hear. But that is the thing here is that when it becomes unserviceable, then it's time, then you go ahead and replace it. I think last year we heard the average life expectancy was about 5 years. That's why we picked 5 years last year. This year it's like, well, if it manages to make it 6, then great, go 6. If it goes 7, fine. We wanted to make this as easy as possible in that transition as you go forward, and we'll start to see, I know there was concern about technology. You've already seen the number of drone manufacturing companies that have grown just in the United States in the last year. That's one thing about America in our process. When we recognize that we have a threat, we're pretty good about coming together and getting it done. Look at what we did after each of the major conflicts, or going into the conflicts. We may not have had the right parts at the beginning, but we did at the end, or right through the middle, and that's what won the day. That's where we are right now. The industry has recognized it has an issue. It is spinning up its manufacturing capability. It's spinning up its capabilities as we go forward. And we are on that point now, and that's what this bill will do to help process that through.
Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Majority Leader. One of the things that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around is if this is a national security threat, if it's identified at the highest levels, why isn't it being taken care at the federal level? Why would it be up to states to, who have, again, no access to the classified information? Why would it be up to state legislators to do this instead of the federal government when it sounds like the national threat is so grave?
Majority Leader Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative, for the question. It's actually a really good question. We did have that discussion last year, and I think it's a multi-pronged approach is what we also talked about, is that the federal government has its responsibilities there. We have a responsibility within that to tag team and latch on connective tissue to make sure the whole country is safe in this process, and that's why the need for this is we're telling our agencies, all right, look, this is what is coming, this is what's there, this is the guidelines we're working within and directing us to do that. So that's the reason for it.
Representative Corbett.
Just listening to what you're saying is what would stop an agency, whether it's a sheriff's office or whatever, kind of pre-ordering parts now that would last 10 years, or how would you know when they were wore out, they did order something? I mean, how would you ever know any of that?
Majority Leader Croft.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, do we know that all the time? I mean, we're on the same team. We got to trust the team to do what is the law, and that's what we're laying out here. And if they pre-order stuff, and that's what they do. I would tell you right now, they've probably already pre-ordered a lot of stuff, not because of this or anything else, just because that's the way it goes. You don't want your systems to be down. You want them to be up and operational. So I'm sure they have a stock supply that will then lead to a certain point and get to that. That's why we also took off a lot of that stuff, because it just became so hard to manage. And we're asking them to manage all of this at the same time. So we tried to take a reasonable approach this year. And so I appreciate the question.
All right. Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so if the federal law is going to give 1 year to determine whether the DJI drones are a national security threat, and let's just say that after 1 year they determine then this is great. Is there any chance that they're going to determine that it is not a national security threat? I personally don't think so. But two, is there a chance that through this period of reviewing it and analyzing the equipment, we're able to dismantle and to change or alter any type of communication from the internal aspect components going back to CCP or any other place? And if that's the case, if we're able to alter, how would that impact what we just passed? They'd still be able to use old components, alter them. Would they be able to purchase any of this on a market? Just your thoughts.
Majority Leader Croft.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know. That's a great question. I think at the end of the day, if they all come out and say, oh, this is a good company or whatever they decide. I think this provides us some flexibility in that. We could come back and readdress those things as we go forward. But at least we're putting a marker out there, getting our folks moving in the direction of making sure our stuff is safe and secure. So we're not sitting back waiting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there will be plenty of time to make changes as we need it. Thank you.
All right, I'm seeing no further questions for you, sir. Thank you for your time and all your effort on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, next up, so we have Michael Lucci, but he is moved to written only. Andrew Weens with State Armor Action.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew Weens, representing State Armor Action. You all heard a lot of great information from Jackie Deal, who's on the board, as well as Majority Leader Croft, so I won't take too much of your time. Just wanted to point out a few things. It was mentioned earlier, but as you know, user data stored in China is effectively the property of the Chinese Communist Party. That's not a matter of speculation. That is a matter of Chinese law. So the 2017 National Intelligence Law requires any Chinese entity to provide any data it collects to PRC. And that's factual information. I think I included the link in my testimony. State Armor has done some research in other states, and that has revealed that as many as 95% of government drone purchases can come from one CCP-linked Chinese vendor. You heard about them earlier, DJI. I don't know the exact number in Kansas, but I think the Majority Leader mentioned 70%. I think it's probably north of that in Kansas. Obviously, DJI is categorized by the DoD as a Chinese military company operating within the United States. Former President Biden's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and his Department of Justice released a memo finding that Chinese-manufactured UAS, unmanned aircraft systems, or drones, continue to pose a significant risk to critical infrastructure and U.S. national security. While any UAS could have vulnerabilities that enable data theft or facilitate network compromises, the PRC enacted laws that I talked about earlier provide their government, who's a foreign adversary of the U.S., with expanded legal grounds for accessing and controlling that data. And again, this is a nonpartisan issue. That was former President Biden's DOJ and CISA. DJI is obviously subject to those laws, so I just would commend this bill to you and say that taxpayers really deserve a drone provider or multiple drone providers that can't be compelled to spy upon our critical assets and our critical infrastructure. And then to the question that was asked earlier, was a good question from the representative about procurement, Section 2 of the bill. Obviously, it's not up to me, it's up to you all, but I think there is a good public policy case to be made for banning state agencies from acquiring finished goods from foreign adversaries. And you see that list in the bill. I mean, I think from a taxpayer perspective, we should not be trying to acquire goods, final or finished goods or services from these foreign principals, China, Iran, North Korea, et cetera. So I would commend that section to you to at least consider what that would look like going forward. I know that's not limited to drones. I think by the language of the bill, it's pretty broad, but I think there's a good public policy case for why that's in there. And with that, I'm happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any questions? Mr. Weens. All right, you got off easy.
Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any other oral proponent. Is there anyone else here to testify as a proponent? All right, seeing none. There are a couple of written only in the S drive, and we will move on to opponents. And I believe we do have one oral proponent today. Right here. Adam Heffley, the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department. You can make sure that microphone is on. Is it blue dot on there?
Now it's
red.
on.
Got it.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I'm Deputy Chief Adam Heffley, a licensed Part 107 pilot from the Lawrence Police Department, and I come forward today in opposition to House Bill 2293. At LPD, we operate a robust UAS program with 25 FAA certificated pilots. We utilize various devices for crime scene mapping, large-scale incident management, crimes in progress, search and rescue, assisting local fire departments, and supporting officer safety during crisis events. Recently, Lawrence Police flew a device into a residence that, unbeknownst to us, had explosives set up with the intention to kill first responders. We were able to use the drone to identify this fatal threat prior to sending any human beings into the house, undoubtedly saving the lives of first responders on scene. These devices put time and distance between first responders and potential threats. They also provide first responders with information about people and places they are approaching, which increases the safety of the public. These tools allow us to see if a person is hidden, armed and a danger, or alternatively unarmed and possibly in need of help. The U.S. market has made positive steps toward a goal of filling the needs of first responders, but won't be in a position to adequately do so for several more years. The devices that are offered today can cost 3 or 4 times as much as devices already on the market and available to us today. The U.S.-made devices also still fall short of the technical abilities available in foreign-produced ones that are mission critical for first responders. We ask that you not hamstring law enforcement's ability to safely serve the community. Our department has a strong policy that acknowledges the potential issues that come with the UAS program and the equipment we utilize. We have, with intention, established protocols for our use of drones to ensure that they are not connected to sensitive department and law enforcement systems, while still allow us to secure video evidence and keep people out of harm's way. Due to an inflationary economy that has led to rising personnel costs and decreased discretionary spending dollars, we have no available funding to replace the devices we currently operate. Our drone budget was significantly decreased in 2024, is $0 for 2025, and will be $0 again in 2026. An unfunded mandate forcing a change in equipment in the next 5 years would essentially end our program that has unquestionably saved lives. We ask that you not vote to limit our ability to mitigate risk to our first responders and the public we serve. The lives of law enforcement officers and the people of Kansas depend on that. And I stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think anybody here wants to remove tools out of your tool chest, help you do your job. Everybody knows that the city of Lawrence needs every bit of help they can get in that area. Does your agency have a plan to replace your drones?
Currently, we have no funding to replace our drone fleet. When we put our drone program into place, we intentionally diversified our fleet, not all investing in one product. However, as discussed here, a large portion of that is a DJI product. A secondary level of investment is an Autel product, which is not a DJI company, but also produced in China. We additionally have another product that's built in, at the time, Belgium, has been acquired by a U.S. company. So we have diversified in order to stand in the case that something like this would occur. However, due to the technical abilities of those devices, DJI carries more than 90% of our work.
Okay, so there has to be a plan to replace your technology. There has to be a mechanic in a workshop has a plan to replace his tools. You know that these Chinese products are going to eventually be removed from the market one form or another. They are an adversary nation, so there has to be some kind of plan. I mean, heck, I have a plan to replace my iPhone because eventually they're going to stop servicing my particular, 2012 version of the iPhone. So you're telling me your drone division doesn't have a plan to get off of the Chinese-made products? And
Deputy Chief.
So to answer your question, as to a mechanic, you're looking at one of them. This is not the New York City Police Department. We don't have a drone division. We have an authorized strength of 152 officers, which includes patrol persons and drone pilots. We do have a plan to support and transition to the next available technology that suits the mission best. However, I, like probably everybody here, in opposition to your analogy about your budget at home, I don't control the budget that I'm allotted in order to facilitate that transition to a plan. I'm at the whim of government budgeting. So while yes, over time we do look to transition to a different product or whatever's the best product at the time, given what we're able to purchase, right now I don't have other options. The Skydio and Brink and some of these other options that were discussed here come at a price tag of 3 to 4 times of the stuff that I have in play right now. So when you talk about a replacement plan to replace the fleet that I operate today, I'm going to need 3 or 4 times as much taxpayer money to try and replace that with which does not operate as well in the same manner.
Vice Chair Turk.
Okay, well, first of all, I apologize if you feel like I was taken away from your 20, I see 25 FAA certified pilots, that's a pretty good number. If I labeled it a division or a department, that's not how you do it within your agency. I misinterpreted your numbers. I would say, well, then I would ask, just out of curiosity, in order to maintain this fleet, if tomorrow we can't get any more parts, how long would your fleet last before they would become inoperable? A best guess, best estimate.
Deputy Chief.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me clear up the first part for us, and then I'll answer your second question. With our 25 certificated pilots, those are spread throughout patrol so that we have people on duty all the time that can operate a device. That maybe clears that a little bit. If our devices become non-functional for whatever reason, it is unlikely, in my opinion, that most of the devices will, in air quotes, age out. We're operating these devices in real environments with weather, with suspects, flying them into houses on barricaded subject incidents in which they are damaged, destroyed. And quite frankly, that's the cost, because then I don't have to put a person in a uniform into that house. So to answer your question, if they age out, probably in that 5-year range, plus or minus, depending on it. My today concern is I have several small devices that I could fly into a house where a barricaded subject has a weapon, potentially a hostage, verify whether or not somebody is in danger or not, or that there's a threat to first responders that are going to then have to force their way into the house at some point. If that's damaged and downed, then I'm out. And I could buy that and have that in play for $1,500. One of the American counterparts that can have the same function is going to cost me 10 times that much with lead time. That's not an arena that most small agencies in Kansas can play in. So we would just be out of luck, and we would be sending a person in on the next one.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been listening to your situation here, and everything ages out and everything breaks. But just say that the people in Washington D.C. decided to put a 200% tariff on these parts just to give them incentive to protect America. It's hard to compete on having things built if you don't have to pay somebody to work, or they're slave labor just to get a deal. And they may be the best for now, but I think you really ought to be getting a plan together for the future, because I don't think things are going to hold like they are right now. I'm just guessing, but a lot of things that you like to buy that's half price, you probably wouldn't want to see how they're made. Thanks.
Deputy Chief.
Yes, I understand, and I'm not minimizing the risk to business-wise being involved with a company out of China. I'm not. It is what it is. What I'm trying to do is put tools in the hands of first responders who are out in the community dealing with risk every day. And that is something that is my responsibility to ensure that if I can put something in that spot instead of a person, that I have to do that and need to do that. Now, what I can do also is I can put in some mitigating strategies to air gap things like DJI products from our department networks, which we do have in place. So there are some other things that can be done in order to accomplish both goals. I am hopeful the American market will improve continually. I've been involved in speaking with several different companies beyond the big names out there, which, as somebody pointed out, buys batteries from China. Those batteries have firmware, which is software. So to say that that is a panacea, that it's going to correct all this, is just not true. So what can we put in place to allow our first responders, and I keep talking about police, but there's a bunch of fire folks here too, to have the tools that they need while also protecting us, because I do recognize that as an issue.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Chief, thank you for your service, by the way. Outside of price, what is one technology that you have evaluated that has led you to go to DJI that hasn't been in another manufacturer? Again, outside of price, not thinking about price.
Deputy Chief.
Yes, sir. Two basic ones come to mind first and foremost. The first is most of your American companies are starting to come on, and one of the big names is coming on with UAS devices that are law enforcement are starting to adopt, and it is very good at traveling 300, 400, 100 feet in the air, providing back real-time information through a cloud, which is what it is, and providing that information to law enforcement. That's fantastic. I'm a fan of it. It is a good thing. That device cannot go into a house. It just can't. Size-wise, it can't. It won't allow you to take it into a house. So indoor flight is a huge thing for us. It is one where it is, if it not is today, it is going to be the standard for tactical teams to deploy a UAS into a house before they start putting people in there. This is the next generation of the old, bomb robot, except more nimble, quicker, cheaper, more accessible, all those things. So indoor flight is the first one. There are American companies that do provide that, but again, to get into the door with an American-produced device that can do indoor flight, at least 10 times the cost. So for a lot of small agencies, that's their budget. They have one if they can get into that. The second one is a function called perching. Seems like a very simple function, in which we would fly a device to an area where we can get a vantage point and see an incident, a subject, something like that, because many times these events are very long in duration. Typical UAS batteries are 30 minutes or less, maybe 5 minutes more depending on who you're operating and what you're doing and some different things that don't really matter for our purposes. But you can fly that device, set it down, and watch your subject from a distance and operate for hours, just sending back video. It just operates as, in the old TAC team, it operates as a throw camera, provides real-time intel to your commanders back to make decisions to react appropriately. The UAS, major UAS player is talking about maybe having that feature next year, and it'll probably come with a cost, and that's the struggle.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Certainly, thank you, Deputy Chief, for being here. It was great speaking to you and your team earlier. I want to thank you for your testimony. I don't think that anyone here is denigrating or, not feeling the passion that you have for your mission or the care that you have and the concern that you have for your troopers and everyone that's up under you, for your officers. But we're trying to balance, right, the national security aspect of it, things that are coming down from the feds, things that we need to do in accordance with Article 10 of the Constitution here in the state of Kansas, those constraints that we have, fiscal constraints that you're seeing. You guys are doing all with none or more with less. So I can understand that. What do you think, and I want to be solutionary if we can, try to get to that place since you're here testifying today before we take up any type of bill. If you're thinking about across the spectrum inside law enforcement, is there an opportunity that you might see there for cannibalization of devices, components, things of that nature that might be able to extend, the time frame? As you've heard before, life cycle management, that type of planning that you have with that in accordance with planned obsolescence. And then what about any type of incentivization that could be done to try to spur on reinvestment, even at the local government level? We talk about that a lot here at the State House, how we try to keep everything at the local level with local government. And you just talked about, you're at the whim of local government budgeting process. But how do we get them to understand the fierce urgency of now? What will be some of your comments there if we needed to amend any legislation? What will be your ideas there? Thank you.
Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Yes. Again, I hope in my rhetoric that the committee understands I understand the risk, and I'm cognizant of the risk that is out there with some of these devices. And I would take it a step further to say, to look at this as just a UAS or drone deal is probably not appropriate either, if this is the concern. But I am very hopeful for the U.S. market. There are several companies that I've seen, bad pun, but take off really quick and become potential major players in the market. And I think that is the future of this industry. But most of them are 2 to 3 years from even having a product that they can ship out. Some of these American companies now that are starting to get some of their manufacturing in place were selling devices 2 years ago, and they're just getting delivered and starting to get up on scheduling and stuff now. I'm a big fan of supporting U.S. companies, and Kansas companies would be fantastic in this arena. Looking at it, what I haven't found is a company that's like an upstart that's stable enough, that has the right mixture of brains and marketing, because I've met some really amazing minds that are working on this sort of stuff, but putting brains, marketing, and all those things together, I've learned is an art that I don't have. So I am hopeful for those to occur down the road. My major concern is, before we get there, what are we as first responders going to do when we don't have that device? And the simple answer is, we're going in. And that is not always a good answer when there's a tool out there that we're deciding that we're not going to utilize. When I believe there are some mitigating things could be put in place, policy, some prescriptive denials of attaching to CGIS networks, to law enforcement networks, to government networks. That in my mind makes a ton of sense, and it is definitely doable. But that is, into the details that I don't see here.
All right, I'm not seeing any further questions for you. Deputy Chief, I appreciate you spending your time to come up here, and we're listening, and we're gonna try to work things out. But at the end of the day, there could be, federally, these things can be banned, and at that point, or if this bill passes as it is, at that point, the People's Republic of the City of Lawrence would have to budget this properly. I mean, they're going to have to be able to say one program is more important than another, and this is clearly the more important to protect the lives of first responders, and they'll have to make those decisions. And I think there was an article just recently on the amount of money that city council is sitting on, and how they're spending it. And so hopefully that they would wake up and budget properly in order to keep you protected. But that's going to be their local decision they'll have to make in the case that federal government or ban these things, or we pass this bill. So we appreciate your time today. Did you have any closing comments?
Just that I appreciate what you're saying about choices government's making. There's Lenexa, Shawnee, several other agencies back here that didn't have the opportunity to provide speaking testimony. There's several Kansas state law enforcement agencies that can't use this technology who we've assisted with. This is not a Lawrence issue. This is a law enforcement fire department issue. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
One last question from Representative Clayton.
No, I just want to thank you for being here, and I do want to call the committee's attention to the written testimony from other law enforcement agencies. I also want you all to keep in mind that while you might disagree with Lawrence's politics, this is a private citizen up here who is working because he believes in law enforcement. We don't know his politics, so cut him a break. Thank you for being here.
I have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about.
Representative Croft.
I'm a Topeka
No.
resident.
You want it?
Which one's mine?
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so that's all we got for today. Representative Croft.
But, Mr. Chair, I do have one thing, and I believe if the revisor makes sure, there are exceptions if there's not the technology available to give them that process to go through to get an exception. So understand exactly where the comments were coming from, and I thought we had an example in there or a way to at least mitigate that, just to maybe alleviate those fears.
Revisor Reimer?
Yes, that is correct. And so if the committee wants to turn to the bill there on page 1, there are exceptions. If you look at lines 25 through 33, you can get an acquisition, even if it's prohibited by the bill, if it meets those requirements in page 1, lines 25 through 33.
Thank you for pointing that out. All right, so we will see you Monday, and Monday we will start with the, what is today, Wednesday?
Today's Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll see you tomorrow to do the back to child care. All right, thanks.